We are. Okay. We're good. Thank you. We do. We did a 4-person quorum in the rules, so. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. We have 3 items on today's agenda. I'm going to use the chair's discretion to change the agenda up a little bit. The first thing I would like to do is call forward Mr. Parker and whoever is going to be, I note Mr. Daniels is not here, whoever is going to be speaking for the board at this meeting.
Mr. Chair.
Is anyone going to speak for the board, Ms. Parker?
We didn't. We sent out the notice on Friday after we got the notice from the committee, and the communication we got to the staff was that I and staff members were to be present, but did not request board members. We sent out the notification, but with the with the limited amount of advance notice, none were available to who we could get in contact with to prep for this meeting.
I wasn't aware that I needed to specifically request a board member to be present, but why don't we, someone who could speak for the board to be present. Obviously, we have a board member present, but I apparently need to make the specific request for someone to speak for the board to be present. So why don't we work it this way? From now on, unless the chair requests otherwise, I would like for a member of the board who can speak for the board to be present at all meetings of this committee. Is that understood? All right, thank you. I have in front of you today, Mr. Parker, 2 documents. They're down at your table. And Representative Mitchell has one as well, or has them as well. So all the members of the committee have these 2 documents. Sorry, there's a resolution, and then there is a work session listing of MARTA's affirmative legislative agenda for 2013. All right. Now you're familiar with these 2 documents?
They look familiar, sir.
All right. On Friday, I'm going to start the meeting off rather than by sticking to the agenda for this part of the meeting with a brief discussion of House Bill 264. Mr. Parker, I approached MARTA on Friday with a proposed list of changes to that legislation. Are you familiar with that?
The staff came back to me and mentioned that they had a discussion with you. Yes.
Right. And what was MARTA's response to that proposed list of changes?
That we have a resolution that was passed by the board some number of weeks ago and was read into the record at the previous martoc meeting, and as such the MARTA staff is not in a position really to deviate from that until we get back in front of our board. So what our position is that we stand with what we have originally proposed in terms of having the maximum amount of flexibility possible in running the business and making sure we can take advantage of every opportunity to be as efficient and as effective as we can be, and beyond that, not necessarily engage in any items outside of the purview of what the board gave us responsibility and authority to do.
Okay. I'm not familiar with the resolution having been read at a meeting of this committee, but I do want to visit. I mean, is the resolution that you have in front of you, is that the resolution that you're speaking of?
I believe so. Yes, sir.
All right. When was this resolution passed by the board? Because actually, there are members of this committee who are not at all familiar with this document.
Okay. Well, unless I'm misspeaking, when at the last Martoc committee meeting, Chairman Daniels and I came in, and as part of Chairman Daniels' opening comments, I believe that's when he read into the record the MARTA resolution.
All right, that might. All right. Well, I do want to actually go through each of the other document that you have in front of you. Do you recognize this as MARTA's affirmative legislative agenda for the 2013 session?
Yes, I believe so. I think this was the earlier work document where we went in with the board and talked through what some of the legislative items that we would pursue would look like. So yes.
Okay, so this is MARTA's affirmative legislative agenda, and the resolution is a refinement of this document that contains some items, for lack of a better way to put it, that MARTA does not want to see in the legislation, correct?
I think that's a fair way to characterize it.
All right. Let's go through the document. And are you familiar with the offer that the chair put on the table on Friday? I mean, with the substance of it, Mr. Parker?
Again, the staff came back and said that there were some items you had mentioned, and we discussed them a bit, and my general response was, again, I don't have the authority to go outside of what the board has already passed and given us direction on. So that was my general response. But we did not go into detail about here's what's good about this particular item or what's bad about that particular item, that sort of thing. We did not have that type of debate, if you will.
Okay. Let's go through each of these items, first of all. Permanent elimination of outdated financial restrictions, and under that item, number 1, it discusses the 50-50 split. See that? This is the affirmative agenda.
Make sure I'm reading from the same thing you're reading. Okay.
And take as much time as you need to familiarize yourself with each of these items.
Right. You're looking at page 2 where it says work session 12-312 up top.
Right.
Yes.
The bill that passed the House, House Bill 264, did contain, although there's no permanent elimination of the 50-50 split, did contain an additional 3 years relaxation. Is that correct?
From understanding, yes.
And at minimum, we are still talking with the deal that was put on the table as of Friday about a minimum of 1 extra year. Is that your understanding of what we discussed on Friday? So in any event, although this document speaks of permanent elimination, we're at least talking about a further relaxation of the 50-50 split that would expire in 2013, in June 2013, for at least 1 year and possibly up to 3 years in the version of the bill that passed the House. Okay. So to some degree, we're covering item number 1. To some extent. All right. Item number 2, allow rail contracting services. That's not in any particular version of the bill, nor is it anything we've discussed, correct?
Other than when we first presented to the committee back in, that may have been actually still been in December or January or early January, when we laid out our initial legislative agenda, that was included, but has not been any in the subsequent documents, I believe, that you presented.
Okay, so this is not covered in 264.
Correct.
All right. Number 3, union negotiations, streamlining the fact-finding process. That is in House Bill 264, correct?
From my understanding, yes.
Right. That was an affirmative request by MARTA. We did provide in the bill for a streamlining of the collective bargaining process, correct?
From understanding, yes, sir.
Now, collective bargaining is going to occur when? This year?
This year.
Not next year. Not 2014, 2013. So if we were to pass any legislation if we were to pass any legislation that was going to deal with the collective bargaining process and wanted to do that prior to the current round of collective bargaining, it would need to be done this year. Is that correct?
If we want to make those changes, yes.
Right. Item number 4, staggered terms for the MARTA Board of Directors. It's your understanding that currently the entire board would roll off at the same time, correct? There are no staggered terms presently.
Correct.
And in House Bill 264, we provide for staggering of the terms of the MARTA Board of Directors, correct?
Again, that's my understanding.
And that was an affirmative request by MARTA that's contained in House Bill 264?
That's correct.
Right. Item number 5, I mentioned to Mr. Haggard today that we were willing to keep the general manager's authority at $200,000, up from $100,000 in the MARTA Act. And that is something that was a request from MARTA in item number 5, correct? Although here it says $250,000, we ended up going from $100,000 to $200,000.
Correct. That we do look, or had requested that the amount of discretion was increased.
Right, and MARTA very much would like for that change to be made. Is that not, am I reading that incorrectly based upon all the interaction I've had with MARTA on that subject?
It is a piece of the legislative agenda that we did put forward. Yes, sir.
All right. Item number 6. I don't believe we've addressed in any version of the bill. Is that correct?
Correct.
Item number 7 we were going to discuss today, but we'll hold that for a later meeting, correct?
That's correct.
Item number 8 is not in there, nor is item number 9. Correct?
Yes.
So, based on the document you have in front of you, House Bill 264 contains a significant portion of MARTA's affirmative legislative agenda for the 2013 legislative session, correct?
Sorry, could you say that again?
House Bill 264 contains a significant portion of MARTA's affirmative legislative agenda for the 2013 legislative session, correct?
Yes.
Now, moving on to the resolution. And I'll give you a second to read the resolution.
I move for adjournment.
You're not right. Oh. No, you're still not recognized. Well, there at the bottom it states, whereas MARTA is pleased that House Bill 264 includes provisions including the flexibility and efficiency, increasing the flexibility and efficiency of the authority by increasing the level at which a contract must be presented for board approval from $100,000 to $200,000. So there it is right there. MARTA actually wants that change to occur, correct?
Yes.
And at on the next page, House Bill 264 includes the staggering of board terms to provide for more stable transitions from one board to the next. That's also in House Bill 264, something that MARTA wanted, correct?
Yes.
Whereas MARTA's Board of Directors respectfully requests the General Assembly not include provisions within House Bill 264 which could negatively compromise federal financial eligibility to MARTA. What provisions are being specifically referenced there? I mean, that's a general statement, but obviously it must refer to something. So what does it refer to?
Well, a few things. One, we certainly didn't know what the final version of what 264 would look like, so we wanted to make the general statement of anything that could have a negative impact on MARTA's ability to receive federal funding. But then a few things that, in fact, that you touched on at the one particular that you touched on at the last MARTOC meeting was as related to the pension, that if the legislation essentially barred any new represented employees from being part of the pension plan, I believe in your conversations with the Department of Labor, they felt that that could be a violation of 13C, and as a result could impact MARTA's ability to receive federal funds. In addition, some have questioned whether, as it relates to mandating privatization of certain components, that those things could also potentially have an impact on 13C. We don't know the answer to that as of yet, but those were two of the examples that I think we were looking at.
Is there anything else in the bill?
Not that comes to mind.
Okay. So taking those two provisions in the arrangement that we discussed on Friday, is it your understanding that the chair offered to remove the privatization provision from the bill altogether?
Yes. As I said, when the staff came back and chatted about this, they mentioned, I believe it's that several of the items that were originally in 264 were removed.
Well, they've not been removed yet, but is it your understanding that that was the offer that was made by the chair when we discussed that when we discussed the legislation on Friday?
Yes.
To remove that provision altogether, and that's what MARTA is referencing here in this whereas clause, along with the pension piece, which the chair offered to make permissive rather than mandatory. Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding.
Would you have a problem with it being made permissive? If it's just a suggestion by the General Assembly that the pension should end, that new employees should not be put on the pension plan?
I think generally what we would prefer is just simply not having mandates as it relates to you, because we don't know what we don't know at this point in terms of once we get into the negotiations, the discussions, and that sort of thing, what else that may be of value to us when we enter into negotiations with the labor union. There may be something of greater value than even the pension program for us during those discussions. But if it's mandated, if you will, or even referenced, then I think that creates potentially an atmosphere where we don't go into the negotiation with our full arsenal of items we want to bring to the table, and they may bring to the table as well.
I understand, but was it your understanding that in the arrangement that was discussed on Friday, one of the specific offers was to no longer make that provision mandatory?
Yes, I did hear that.
Okay, so then what would remain the problem?
I didn't say, well, again, one of the things that we try to do when you go into negotiations is have everything on the table so that the full arsenal of negotiated items can be dealt with. If one group walks into the room assuming this is very, very, very important to them, so we're going to get something substantially for this particular item. Having gone through a few of these negotiations before, that I've seen that happen. But I think if I'm understanding your question specifically, if it's advisory, does that remove the 13C?
No, my question is, you stated a preference that it not be mandatory. My response to that was on Friday was that, well, okay, we won't make it mandatory. I mean, it wasn't actually a response because I think I put it on the table first.
Correct, because I don't think we presented that we want this particular item, and then we said, no, we want it in a different way. I don't think we presented it.
All right, so if we were to remove it from the bill altogether, then would that be satisfactory?
It's not our bill.
I understand,
Right.
but I'm trying to ascertain Marta's position on the bill. I mean, I've been presented with an affirmative legislative agenda and then a resolution in response to the bill after it was moving through the legislative process, and I think it's a perfectly legitimate line of inquiry. Would have preferred for Mr. Daniels to be here as well, but I think it's a perfectly legitimate line of inquiry to ascertain what Marta's position is on the bill, especially in light of the conversations that occurred on Friday, in an effort to move the bill forward.
Well, again, I'm just making sure I understand your question. If your question is, do we prefer language that gives us more flexibility versus language that mandates? Yes, we prefer the language that gives us more flexibility.
And is it your understanding that what the chair put on the table on Friday would give you more flexibility?
As opposed to what was originally presented in 264, yes.
All right. And then, whereas House Bill 264 provisions restricting the percentage of sales tax revenue that may be used for debt service could result in negatively impacting the authority's ability to meet unforeseen safety mandates, expansion, and other needs. Is it your understanding that the debt provision was offered to be taken out of the bill on Friday?
Yes.
And that's what this resolution requests to be done. Correct?
Yes.
So what remains of everything that was put on the table on Friday? What remains that Marta would have a problem with?
That, from my understanding, and you can clarify that, that as an offer to support those items, that Marta would be supportive of changing the board governance. And that is something we not discussed at the board level, staff level. So, and that's, I would have to just ask that of you if that's the case.
Well, now I really wish that Mr. Daniels were here, because Mr. Daniels has said repeatedly in the public domain that the MARTA board doesn't take a position on that provision.
That's correct, and that's what I was getting at, that we don't take a position on that. That was my understanding. That
Well, then what remains in the bill that MARTA has a problem with?
maybe I'm not understanding. When you say
I've just gone through the board's entire resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And every single issue that was raised in this resolution, the chair is offering to address in MARTA's favor. Correct?
I understand that point, yes.
So I've asked you what else MARTA has a problem with. And your response to me was the board governance provisions, which is a provision, which is a group of provisions that Mr. Daniels has said repeatedly in the public domain MARTA does not have a position on.
And that's exactly what I'm saying here, is that we have not taken a position on that, but it was my understanding that what you mentioned to the staff was that the totality of the bill would, in addition to including, or this offer, as you described it, would, in addition to including these things that MARTA, in its resolution that was passed a few weeks ago, would support, may also include things as relates to governance, then that puts the bill in a place where, you know, we don't want to be in the middle of an issue that some of the folks who support MARTA support, and an issue that they may not support, so we've just taken no position on that. So that's what I was getting at.
Okay, but that is contrary to the I mean, that's contrary to. All right, so now you're saying MARTA has no position on the bill.
No.
But MARTA has a position in favor of all of these things.
That's correct.
And had a position against these things. Some of these things are in the bill. these things had been taken out.
All correct.
And yet MARTA still has no position on the bill, and it's because of the board governance provisions. I don't understand where you're coming from.
Let me
Mr.
make sure
Parker.
if I understand what you said. Here's an offer that the staff brought back to me, and that was if these things that the board and MARTA adopted were acceptable, would we then find the bill acceptable? If that were the totality of the bill, but the things we have not addressed as a staff and board would be things that go beyond the provisions you just mentioned. So that's what I mean, which I don't think is in any way inconsistent from anything we've said up to this point. As you just mentioned, the board chair has said over and over again that he nor the board take a position on governance, and the staff has not taken a position on governance. So if the totality of the bill were those affirmative things you just mentioned, then I think the board would be fine with it. But if the bill includes other items that the board has not addressed, then I couldn't speak for the board and say, then yes, we support it.
All right. One further question, and then I'll yield to members of the committee for questions. The bill, as it stands right now, has a 3-year lift of the 50-50 split, correct?
That's my understanding.
And at
yes.
minimum, what I put on the table on Friday was going for 1 year on the 50-50 split, seeing where we are next session. What is MARTA's plan to deal with the 50-50 split being reimposed June 2nd, 2013?
We haven't worked out all the final details of it, but we believe we will be able to adjust as necessary if there is a 1-year lifting of the, if we don't have that 50-50 requirement in the FY14 year. So we think we'll be able to adjust.
So you think and what adjustments are you proposing then to deal with the imposition of the 50-50 split June 2nd, 2013?
Then what we will do as we craft the budget for the upcoming year is to, again, just make sure we stay in compliance with the law as it would then reflect. So in other words, as we put together our capital program and our operating program, we would essentially, again, make the adjustments necessary to make that happen. We've not presented any final version of that to the board, so I'm not at liberty at this point to say here's exactly how we will deal with it, but we have some internal conversations with the staff, and we think we can make those adjustments as necessary.
Okay. I'm going to call another meeting next week, and at that meeting I would like detail on how MARTA intends to address the imposition of the 50-50 split as of June 2nd, 2013. I mean, I think it's a direct question that needs to be answered. And MARTA is unwilling to participate in moving forward a bill that almost entirely contains provisions that MARTA wanted and does not contain provisions that MARTA did not want. Instead of dealing with that legislation, would prefer to have the 50-50 split reimposed effective June 2nd, 2013. So I want to know before this legislature adjourns sine die what MARTA's plan is. Because what I would hate to happen is for MARTA to have sat silent on this legislation, and then we get out of this legislative session, and then we hear about fare increases and cut service. Because my guess is that's what's coming. It's been the history.
Mm-hmm.
It's been the whole history over that issue. And I want to put it on the table right now because the House has already passed that provision out one time. I don't want to say we're going to, but we may well pass it out a second time. And MARTA sat silent through the whole thing. So before this legislature adjourns, I do want answers as to how MARTA is going to address the 50-50 split. I hope that you can absorb it.
Understood.
Members of the committee. Representative Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, first of all, I believe that the general manager is in a very difficult situation to publicly come before this body and essentially advocate for a bill that the chief funders of MARTA are opposed to, places him in a very difficult situation. It has been said here that you haven't advocated for the bill. Mr. General Manager, have you advocated in opposition of the bill?
If before you answer that question, what chief funders are opposed to the bill, Representative Mitchell?
Well, I understand that there are members of the Fulton and DeKalb commissioner, that board of commissioners who write the checks. Are opposed.
What checks do they write, Representative Mitchell?
Well, as you know, Fulton, DeKalb, and the city of Atlanta are the check writers for MARTA.
That's fascinating. Mr. Parker?
I think the question was, have we actively opposed the bill?
Yes.
And we have not. We have not supported nor opposed any piece of legislation out there.
Yeah. Are members of this body surprised to hear that we've got the bulk of the commissioners from DeKalb and Fulton opposed to this? Are you surprised to hear that? Oh, okay. I just thought I was misspeaking.
No, you're not misspeaking.
Okay.
I would just love to see the checks that the Fulton County government and the DeKalb County government and the city of Atlanta write to MARTA, because I believe they don't exist. Senator Fort?
Good afternoon, Mr. CEO. Let me ask you this. A question has been put to you, which was a question which asked either this bill or no, 50-50 split for going forward. And I hope that a deadline of coming back here and telling people how you're going to deal with it, I hope that that doesn't become a situation where you hurry up and don't do your due diligence because this is there's going to be a lot of work that it's going to take, I would assume, for you to know how you would deal with that. Is that true?
We have some good folks, so we'll work that through. We think we'll be able to work that through.
So you're going to be able to come back here by next
Monday
with those numbers.
Well, what I'll have to do is pull together some scenarios of how we would deal with it.
Okay. Scenarios. So you're not going to have one route or one pathway. You may have multiple pathways.
We may.
Okay. And I just want to be sure. See, and I appreciate you stepping up to the plate and taking on that challenge. But at the same time, I want you to do your due diligence. And I don't think you should be pushed by politics. You should do your due diligence and make sure that those numbers are right and that those multiple pathways are substantive and not just speculative, completely speculative. That's what I would hope. May I follow on, Mr. Chair?
You may.
Isn't not true that you're in an unenviable position, Mr. Parker? By virtue of the fact that you have some people who find your efforts on House Bill 264, you have people on both sides who find it objectionable. Those of us who believe that MARTA is not standing up enough for the institution and the riders, and then you have other folk who think you're doing a disservice to the General Assembly. I would hope that you would take into account what's best for your riders, not for politicians, because you're under interrogation. I hope you would take into account only that which is best for the institution and the riders that use MARTA. But is it not true you're in an unenviable position?
I am very comfortable with the position we're in. One of the things about having had experience with this type of job in the past and having the opportunity to work with legislatures from all over the country is that as long as your message remains consistent and the same and you do the duty that the board has laid out in front of you, the job is the job. So I'm very comfortable with.
So you're following directives from your board.
I am.
And I thought that was the kind of answer I would get, and I appreciate that. But you're following the directives of your board to do what you're doing up here at the General Assembly dealing with this issue. Is that not true?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do want to weigh in on what Representative Mitchell said. Having served on the Fulton County Board of Commissioners for a number of years, I want to make it abundantly clear that that body does not in any way, shape, or form send money to MARTA. The funding is provided through sales tax collection of the folks that spend money within the jurisdictions of Fulton and DeKalb counties. So that I do not want anyone to believe that there is direct appropriation from the bodies that may or may not be in support or opposition to a piece of legislation before us. Secondly, in the interest of due diligence, Mr. Parker, and this may come from your staff in the audience, this resolution that we've been alluding to regarding House Bill 264, I've looked on all of your board agendas since the beginning of the year and since the introduction of this legislation, and I can't find it published anywhere where the board took an official action on this. So if it's possible that I'm missing something that's not published on your website, if you could provide for this body the recorded minutes where the board officially acted on this, that'd be very helpful.
Yes, the board added it to an agenda. Again, what's the date on here? March 4th. The board added the item to the agenda, discussed it, and passed it.
So it is a part of the public record that we could receive a copy from? Because
yes.
as I say, the public doesn't see this on the website or anything that was delivered to any of the members of the General Assembly as far as what the board has taken official action on. I will accept your testimony today, but if possible, it would be very valuable to have the public record updated so that the folks that we represent, the constituents that we all represent, know that we are working from an affirmed position that's been taken.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions for Mr. Parker? All right. Moving on from that item that wasn't an agenda item, but the chair added to the agenda. I will also say that at this time I am removing from the agenda the Medicaid trip item. It was the chair's view that we would move that forward in the 2014 legislative session. At this time, it appears that we may or may not have House Bill 264 in this year's session. If we don't, we'll be here in 2014 on House Bill 264. It would be the chair's preference that we be able to move forward on other things. But, you know, we'll see where we are after this session concludes. All right. The KPMG roadmap, and actually not so much the roadmap, although that's been handed out to members of the committee. The MARTA's plans for implementing the audit. Where do we stand right now, Mr. Parker?
We actually have a couple of folks here. One staff member, Robin Howard, who is leading the effort internally, as well as representatives from KPMG, including David Roberts, and I could ask them to come up and give you a briefing.
Sure, that would be good. I published one.
Yeah, I don't have. Wasn't given to Senate members.
It was distributed as part of the meeting notice, but there is a written agenda, Senator Gooch. Brian, get copies of the meeting notice over here. There's one on worst case scenario, there's one on the office window over there that I prefer not to.
What is it over there? Okay, cool. They moved it. Yeah.
Senator Gooch will distribute copies of the agenda.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
If you can also just let everyone know who you are.
I'm Robin Howard, the Assistant General Manager for Internal Audit, and as Keith said, I have been leading the effort internally as the executive sponsor for the strategic transformation. I've got a few slides here, and then we'll have David Roberts from KPMG provide some additional detail, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions you have. One of the things that we want to talk about very quickly is that this effort is really MARTA's strategic transformation. It's not about KPMG. It's not about outsourcing. It really is about changing MARTA, who we are, making sure that we are financially stable for the upcoming years, but also, more importantly, really about positioning MARTA for the future. It's important that we take advantage of some opportunities that we have before us to make sure that we avoid the fiscal cliff. So what we've been saying within the past 6 months or so is that our strategic transformation objectives really talk about three things. One, avoiding MARTA's fiscal cliff, as we have talked about that internally, and then changing MARTA's business model for long-term financial sustainability, and then also positioning MARTA for the future. So we've started rebranding the effort from just saying KPMG or outsourcing and really talking about this is really about MARTA's strategic transformation. It's so much more. The KPMG report as an external consultant was just a part of what we're doing now. This transformation timeline, we engaged KPMG in January of 2013. They came back and provided for us a detailed transformation roadmap. In January, we received that roadmap and began some very early initiatives. We've also engaged KPMG again to establish the transformational governance, which they recommend to be the first piece of the transformation initiative. And so KPMG right now is on site working on providing the governance piece for us. That's going to last approximately 45 days, but I've got some commitment from David that he's going to get it done in 2 days. No, I'm just kidding. About 45 days. I'll actually let David step in and talk about this piece here, but what we wanted to let the committee know is that from the time we were here in January when we engaged KPMG to provide the timeline to now, KPMG has been actively involved with us, providing us with assistance, and the most important step of the transformation as it stands right now is setting up the governance structure, and they are currently on site doing that. So I'll turn it over to David.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is David Roberts, Director with KPMG, and have been working closely with MARTA, and specifically Robin Howard and Keith Parker over the past several months, and with Mr. Howard over the past year. I think, just to echo from our perspective, I fully believe that MARTA is embracing the transformation roadmap, and right now we are helping to ensure that they execute it properly. The transformation that we've outlined for MARTA is substantial. And the worst thing to do would be to start this transformation ad hoc and really not have the proper governance and framework to measure and monitor and report the results. So what we've been engaged to do currently is help MARTA set up their governance framework. What this really does is it's governance over the entire 5-year transformation. It provides a methodical framework for the transformation. It really defines different committees and organizations within MARTA that has direct accountability and responsibility for the transformation. And it also defines processes for issue resolution and for measuring. I know one thing that I'm sure this committee and citizens will be interested in is, how is the transformation being reported, being measured and reported, and this governance framework will provide that clarity. As I mentioned, that you know, something of this size and stature really does take a full-time focus, and this is something that you know, MARTA is going to dedicate individuals as well as external resources to focus on this transformation on a daily basis. Part of the things that we are helping to create are 3 committees. One, an executive steering committee that reports up to the board and general manager. 2, a program management office that's really responsible for the daily transformation initiatives. And that office is every day waking up and going to bed thinking about how they're moving the transformation forward every day over the next 5 years. And then lastly, for each of the initiatives, there's 12 over the next 5 years. There's separate committees that are responsible for the daily implementation of those. Again, this governance is definitely a leading practice, and something at this significant size really is needed to provide the right steps to make sure MARTA does it successfully. Thank you, Chairman.
All right. Looking at the roadmap, page 12.
Okay.
Procurement policy enhancement, personnel cost efficiencies, and revenue enhancement look to be the first 3 items that we should be working on right now.
Yes, sir.
How are those 3 coming along?
All 3 of them have started. If they have started, and by next month we'll have the formal structure there so that they can be formally linked together. But all 3 of those initiatives have started. They just haven't been centrally managed, if you will. But that will start next month once we finish the governance and then set up the PMO structure.
And by governance, you mean the governance of the implementation program?
Correct. Yes. So right now you have movement. They're just kind of separate. But by next month they'll be all part of a holistic program that's managed centrally.
Okay. And so the procurement policy, by the middle of this year, we should expect to see the procurement policies changed and updated and streamlined?
If we go according to the schedule, that is accurate.
All right. And revenue enhancement opportunities identified?
Yes, sir.
Okay. On the, out of curiosity, the procurement policy enhancement, is the increase in the general manager's authority a part of that package?
It is, yes, sir.
So that will not be completed this year, correct?
Well, the procurement policy enhancement is so much more than just certain individual pieces, and to measure what we consider completion would be, we've taken a look at all these initiatives, which include some requirements to this committee. We were also looking at some of the board policies, and if this committee is favorable to our request, or isn't favorable, then we still identify that as being complete. As long as we address it and try to have that affected in our favor in terms of streamlining the procurement process. So it encompasses looking at it from a top down, which is what legislation potentially affects our ability to procure goods and services, board policies, and then some internal policies.
So is it the objective that by the middle of this year the policies actually be enhanced and streamlined, or is it that they just be identified?
Enhanced and streamlined.
Okay, so
it's policies and procedures. As
so
well.
without that piece, then though, at least there will be one piece of the puzzle that is left out and will not be completed by the middle of this year. Correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Senator Fort.
In terms of revenue enhancement, I mean, generally, what are we talking about? I mean, just generally, I mean, how far are y'all along in identifying, and what are you talking about?
Well, we've already started. 2 weeks ago, we actually started advertising on our website, and and that's just a very small piece. But again, revenue enhancement encompasses looking at our existing revenue stream and having creative ways to increase revenue. Some of the things that we've already done, we have just started advertising on our website, and that's potentially $1,000 to $5,000 per month. It's in very infancy stages, and we can't really gauge what the total outcome is going to be until we see some months of revenue coming in. But that's brand new. In addition to that, we have we're also looking at station naming rights, and we're looking across the country to see other transit industries who have done that successfully. There aren't many, and that's difficult to do. So revenue enhancement is looking at everything that we currently do, which also means increasing ridership, which is difficult to do very quickly. But we're looking at every single thing that KPMG has recommended. In addition to that, we're also looking at other things. One of the things that we're also looking at for revenue enhancement is asking for the ability for us, MARTA, to retain some of the tickets that we write in jurisdictions, parking tickets and other things. So those are things that we're looking at.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
You may.
The privatization that most concerns me, I don't like any of it, but the one that concerns me the most is the paratransit. And as a matter of fact, y'all have, in recent memory, tried that and pulled it back for a number of reasons. I think that y'all need to take special care in privatizing the paratransit and think long and hard because you're affecting a population that is particularly vulnerable. And I want you to talk to us a little bit about what your thinking is as far as making sure that the disabled community that uses MARTA is protected as you consider privatizing that service.
Senator Fort, the board and Keith have made it very clear that they expect a tremendous amount of due diligence done in this area because we're very, very aware of the sensitive nature of this initiative. We're also very aware that this did not go well about 20 years ago. Obviously, since then, there's been a tremendous amount increase in technology and capabilities, including GPS and a tremendous amount of ability to monitor the potential vendor very well and much more effectively than it was done in the past. We absolutely intend to approach this with kids' gloves. We will be very, very transparent in that process. We have a mechanism built in that KPMG is bringing forward with the governance structure to have consistent reporting to the board so we absolutely are aware. We've also reached out to the disabled community. We've reached out to the EDAC community. We've met with their board chair. We've met with the community. We've answered their questions. We've put together a frequently asked question, and we've made ourselves available if they have any questions through calling into the call center. We've also briefed the employees within the call center and provided them with information should they receive calls about this particular initiative. And then Keith has made himself available, and I've also made myself available to answer any questions personally about this initiative. But we do hear you loud and clear. We understand that it's extremely sensitive, and we're making sure that we address that issue in a very proactive and careful manner.
With respect to revenue enhancement, does this include the authority's TOD program, Transit-Oriented Development?
Yes, it does.
And,
yes, sir.
And obviously you're not going to have all those projects ready to go by this time, but I assume you have some plan to have them all identified?
Yes, sir.
And what does that look like?
Well, unfortunately, I can't.
I mean, I know that one of them is in my district in the city of Brookhaven, and they are now affirmatively looking at creating a development authority for that specific purpose. So I assume you guys are pretty far down the road, but I'm interested in hearing.
We have the few things the board has done. First, they adopted some principles as it relates to TOD and public-private partnerships about 2.5 years ago. We are looking to potentially update those guidelines. Additionally, the board has tasked the staff with the effort of identifying 5 projects by summer of next year. 5 projects that we hope to move forward on and have under our belt. A couple of them you just mentioned. We specifically have entered into a due diligence period with a project in Decatur and then a project out in your Brookhaven area. So those 2 are projects that were brought to us by the governments, and therefore we've entered into due diligence phases where we're seeing if these potentially will work for us moving forward. And I'll mention one other quick thing.
You may.
We had what we call MARTA Developer Day, where we invited members of the development community to come out and hear how they could potentially do business with MARTA at the various real estate holdings we have. And we were anticipating a few dozen, and we had over 250 folks show up for that briefing. So there's a lot of excitement, and we think the potential there could be substantial.
All right. Mr. Parker, as long as you're up.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, I just wanted to know where Kensington was on the Brookhaven other entity listed.
Well, why don't you ask Mr. Parker a question?
Yeah, you know, since it was mentioned, I just wanted to know where Kensington was on the list as well.
It actually is on our list of highlighted areas. We presented to the DeKalb Commission this morning, and so that question came up specifically. So that is actually on the list of potential projects for us.
I'm looking at a document with regard to outsourcing paratransit that was produced by MARTA, although it's not part of the presentation of the committee here. It says as follows: question, if MARTA outsources paratransit, what will happen to the drivers? Answer, MARTA plans to allow existing employees to bid for services recommended to be outsourced through managed competition. So it is possible that MARTA employees could win the contract and continue to provide the service in-house. Further, MARTA is looking at options to the RFP that may require the vendor to hire MARTA employees. I'm not really so concerned about that last sentence, but what does that first sentence mean?
That a number of places, one of the ways they have found to save money while preserving a high level of customer service, so that you have a minimum standard, is that what we don't want to do is go any lower in terms of what we already provide. So we want to make sure that the quality of service we provide out there today is at the worst what we provide when we bring on the private sector. So what we would do is create a competitive environment where our employees could compete with the private sector. And if our folks can come up with efficiencies, ways of getting it done better, quicker, less expensively, then say someone from the private sector, keep that quality up, then we would think that they would be able to win those bids if we put them out in such a manner.
Now, is that with regard to just paratransit, or is that with regard to all of the services proposed to be outsourced?
Paratransit is the one that lends itself probably easiest to in that fashion. But we'll look to see if there's opportunities from the internal groups as well from some of those other opportunities.
And how does that work exactly? I mean, do the employees win the contract for a term of years?
Potentially, and that's
potentially or definitely.
Oh, not definitely. What we would do again, and that's why we need to make sure we get do all the due diligence we need in crafting.
If anybody who has their phone on can please turn it off, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
We'll do all the due diligence in making sure we craft what makes the most sense for this region, looking at what competition's out there, what the employment picture looks like, the whole host of things, and packaging this. And the goal, of course, is to come forward with better service, lower cost, and more customer responsive.
So is it possible then that employees would be able to compete with the private sector to win a bid, and then that not be time limited, so that would just continue forward?
I can't imagine that being the end result, because typically when you do manage competition, you do it for a number of years, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, same as you would do with any other contracted out or sourced service.
Representative Riley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the internal employees were to bid for the continuation of provision of service, would they not have to develop a structure that would provide them consistent standing with an external private vendor?
Yes.
So when you're contemplating this, when it's discussion at the early stages, has MARTA begun crafting some kind of RFP process that would define all of this, that would give guidance to folks on how they might structure themselves.
Those are the things we'll be working on with the governance structure in place and a project manager in place and so forth. So those are the things we will be developing.
And a follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chair. When I look at this chart on page 12, the roadmap, and you have the bars of time periods, for example, personnel cost efficiencies, you showed that it has begun in the first quarter, and we're rapidly getting into the second quarter. Do you anticipate full completion by the end of the fourth quarter of 2013, and would you be able to financially show a result at that time?
For which component are you referring
Just
to?
personnel cost. It shows that you contemplate having those efficiencies completed by the end of 2013. Would you have some kind of tangible dollar amount of revenue enhancement built or cost savings built into your next year's budget that would reflect the outcome of this?
I think what we would have are projections of savings in the future. One of the things about this effort that we've tried to be very clear on has been that it cost us up front significant dollars to get each of these items implemented. They have an incubation period, and then the cost savings begin in the outlying years. That's why we are projecting is, I believe by calendar year 5 in this effort is when we would be completely breaking even and beginning to actually going beyond breaking even and beginning to adding to our reserves. So it takes a number of years to see the real fruits of this effort begin to materialize. But what we should have in the first year is the structure and the path for moving forward laid out. So we anticipate that happening with those personnel cost efficiencies.
Along with projections of what your anticipated long-term savings would be.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gooch.
I don't have a question,
Oh,
but
sorry.
I am going to step out for just a few minutes and I'll come back.
All right. Representative Geisinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Parker?
Yes, sir.
You have privatized paratransit before in other cities, is that correct?
Yeah, well, we've done both.
There you go.
There you go.
Try one more time.
There
Yeah.
How about that?
Better.
Goodness gracious.
Lousy equipment.
There we
No,
go.
we got it. You have you've done this before for paratransit in other cities, isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
I'm curious when you start talking about giving the operators an opportunity to bid. I became concerned because MARTA owns all the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have somebody come in that bids on this, they're going to have to, I assume MARTA is going to go ahead and sell the equipment to them or lease it to them or something so that MARTA doesn't end up with all this equipment, but the equipment is continued to be used for the paratransit. Is that correct?
What we will do is create a level playing field so that the private sector would have it would be fair. So, for example, one of the ways we could structure this agreement would be that MARTA provides the facilities, the vehicles, maybe even the fuel, and then put that out for a competition and see if the private sector can get it done better, cheaper, faster, and then at the same time allow employees to put together a proposal that would allow them, again, that same courtesy to see if they can get it done better, cheaper, faster than the private sector.
So instead of really asking, Mr. Chairman, may I? Instead of really asking a firm to come in and bid on the whole package, you're saying that MARTA will supply them with the equipment and the facilities and the repairs on the equipment to keep it moving, and what we're really outsourcing is the driver and the schedule.
No, not necessarily. What we will do is we're going to go through an industry review period where we will talk with the various vendors who provide this sort of service around the country and ask for their best ideas as to how they think this project would work. In some cases, what we may end up doing, and one potential scenario is that we would offer for sale some of the equipment we have, that those folks would take over that equipment as they take on this assignment. Or, again, we may offer it as a lease option for those, for the vehicles and so forth. Or we may want to keep total ownership of them in the event we have a problem like we had the first time, that MARTA had the first time when they tried to outsource the service and it didn't work out. So that if the vendor doesn't perform at a high level, we're not in a situation where we would have to go out and try to procure vehicles in haste. So we don't know just yet exactly what the final structure will look like in this procurement, but what we want to do is create the best atmosphere as possible for competition to get the most vendors as possible coming in saying, here's how we would take on this assignment, and here's what we suggest, and we craft our request for proposals in such a manner to encourage that type of participation.
Mr. Chairman, one further question. What did you find in the other cities when you privatized paratransit?
That no one size fits all, that we've done it both ways. I've had a chance where the internal employees literally came in with a proposal where we had services contracted. They came in with a proposal saying we can get it done cheaper, we will have a higher level of customer service, and we will be more responsive, and they did. And they ended up winning the work. In Charlotte, we had a managed competition, so we went back and forth. In San Antonio, we were going more towards privatization. I think the last contract we signed, it was, where it will end is something in the neighborhood of 40% being internally provided and 60% by the private contractors. So there's no one way to do it in a particular community. That's why we need to do all the study, the research, make sure we talk to our customers, make sure we talk to the advocates that are out there, see what the employment situation looks like here, and then craft the best potential or the best possible request for proposals that we can.
Thank you, Mr. Parker.
Mr. Parker, with regard to privatizing the paratransit service, I mean, there are scenarios in which in which the private operator would own the equipment, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, there are probably many scenarios in which the private operator, if it were outsourced to a private contractor, would use their own equipment, correct?
It could. That's possible.
Right. MARTA just procured new mobility buses. Am I incorrect about that?
No, we did procure new buses.
And how much of the fleet is being replaced?
I don't recall the percentage, but it's quite a few vehicles. But keep in mind, the useful life on these vehicles are such that during one contract term with the private provider, in all likelihood, we would use up that useful life. And so if then there are subsequent opportunities for sourcing, then the new contracts may call for the vendor to provide their own vehicles. But that's not necessarily the thing that is the component that wins, that determines who's going to be most efficient. Most likely it's going to be management, the ability to get people in at reasonable rates, getting the best benefit package that still can recruit a good workforce, and just overall efficiency. So typically the equipment is not going to be the one that wins the day, because they buy vehicles the same way we do. You know, we go out and try to get the lowest cost vehicle at an acceptable rate at a high quality, and private sector does the same thing.
Well, so is there no set of circumstances where there would be a cost savings from going with a contractor that would use their own equipment?
No, there's potential.
There's potentially a cost savings.
That's why we need to do the research.
So I understand that, but I guess I guess the real question is, why? I mean, given the relatively near term in which paratransit is anticipated to be explored for outsourcing. I mean, we're looking at 2013, 2014, the first 2 years of a 5-year roadmap. Mm-hmm. Why would we at this time acquire new equipment for MARTA's own provision of paratransit service? Maybe there's a good answer to that question, but I'd like the answer to the question.
That the current equipment has reached its useful life, and it's time to replace it. One of the things we don't want to do is degrade the current level of service as we anticipate moving forward with this sourcing opportunity. So we wouldn't want to have any person Any one of our current customers will be able to come back and say, you guys have intentionally held off on providing me with a high level of service because you're anticipating the contracting out of services.
How long is the useful life of a paratransit bus?
Typically 4 to 5 years or so. Just depends on what type. And we actually have started looking at a lower duty type vehicle that may even have a shorter useful life, but be more efficient in terms of cost, in terms of fuel and that sort of thing.
Senator Ford.
On the managed competition issue, I want to be clear on a couple things. One, managed competition model is something that's been used for a long time in delivering government services. Is that correct?
Certain cities certainly have been doing it for a while.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And and so it's not unusual in public transit for employees to bid along with against or with the private sector, so to speak, for those services. Is that correct?
I have not done a scan in recent times.
But in your experience?
But I've seen it, yes. Yes, we've seen the public employees compete.
And isn't it true that those contracts usually, they're not in perpetuity, they're limited to a number of years, 1,
Yes, sir.
3, 4, 5 years, and then whoever wins that bid, whether it's a private company or the employees, have to come back and be subject to the same RFP.
That's correct.
As everyone else.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Thank you.
Well, but are you saying then, Mr. Parker, that these contracts that are put out for potential bid by either a private contractor or MARTA employees, they will be for a time-limited term of years?
That is the norm. But again,
That is the norm, or is that what is going to happen at MARTA?
Well, we've not set forth specific recommendations, but that is the norm. I don't want to, again, at a hearing such as this, commit to various things before getting a chance to get in front of the board, meeting with the public, and that sort of thing.
All right. Further questions? Okay. All right. You're done. Thank you. I appreciate the presentation. I think we're at about 3:30 right now. We've not been having great success with multiple item agendas in this committee recently. So what I'm going to do right now is Mr. Allen, Davis Allen, are you available on Wednesday of next week to do this presentation? All right, and you were ready to go today, right? I'm gonna schedule 2 subsequent meetings of this committee for next week. The first is going to be Monday at either 8:30 a.m. or 9 a.m., and that is to hear a presentation from MARTA on its contingency plans for the reimposition of the 50-50 split.
Mr. Chairman?
You may.
We have a published board committee meeting that's scheduled for 10 and 1 o'clock.
No, 10 and shortly after that.
Oh, I'm sorry, 10, and then right after that one concludes, we start the second one, and that's our operations committee and business management. Yes. So I think one of their requests was to make sure we had board representation, and the board members typically attend those committee meetings. Just wanted to point that out as for information.
Actually, Sunday.
What's the availability for Friday, Mr. Parker? I don't view that as an appropriate presentation for the day before the adjournment of the legislative session, so we're not going to do it the Wednesday, but, I mean, what does Friday look like?
This coming Friday is what I'm saying.
This coming Friday, yeah.
The morning of Friday, the 22nd, I think we can make that happen. I have not checked with the board chair, but assuming his schedule will accommodate.
All right, we'll go forward at 8:30 a.m. on Friday with that presentation. And then, Mr. Allen, what time works for? We're actually, let me just double check my calendar, but we're wide open on. Well, not quite. Would 1 p.m. work?
On which day? Wednesday?
On Wednesday, yeah, the 27th. All right. All right, so we have 2 subsequent meetings of this committee set, locations to be announced. This Friday morning, the 22nd at 8:30 a.m. to hear a presentation about contingency plans for the reimposition of the 50-50 split. And Wednesday, the 27th at 1 p.m. to hear a presentation regarding MARTA's debt service. Anything further from members of the committee? Seeing none, there being nothing further to come before the committee, this meeting is adjourned.